Okay, we've started recording. And also the next, I guess, thing to start off with is I wanted to maybe go around and have my colleagues who are in different centers at UT introduce themselves, who are FLAS Fellowship coordinators here at UT. So I will start by saying I'm Agnes Sikowski, and I am the FLAS coordinator for the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies at UT. So we do all Russia, Eastern Europe, and even some Central Asian languages. I see Matt next on my screen. Do you want to introduce yourself, Matt?
Sure, glad to. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Rabatin. I am the FLAS coordinator, amongst other things, in the Center for European Studies. So yeah, and if you have any further questions about applications for CES, you can feel free to reach out for me, and our contact information for everybody will be at the end of the slide. So thank you for coming.
I can go next. I'm Kelly Haug. I am the graduate program coordinator for Middle Eastern Studies. So if you are a grad student interested in Arabic, Hebrew, Persian, or Turkish, you would come to me. And then my colleague, Sam Strohmeyer, I believe is in this meeting. She is our undergraduate contact. So if you're an undergrad interested in those languages, you would reach out to Sam.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. And we are missing our friend from South Asia Institute, Scott Webble, and his contact information will be at the end, but he represents the languages from the South Asia region, which as far as I understand is Hindi, Punjab, and I'm trying to remember. I can't, and well, I'm not sure. I'm not going to speak for him, but you'll see on the slide later all of the languages that are covered under his what he oversees for the FLAS Fellowship. So welcome. You're here to learn a little bit about this, so let's explain what FLAS Fellowships are all about. These are fellowships funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and they award funding. The way that this works is that area studies centers, such as ourselves, here at UT, apply for these funds to the U.S. Department of Education. And the U.S. Department of Education selects centers that meet their criteria to administer these grants through the Title VI program, which is a Higher Education Act funding program. And they're administered in 4-year cycles. So we are in the 2018 to 22 grant cycle, and we are now applying also for the 22 to 26 grant cycle, which I'll go into more detail what that means. But FLAS Fellowships support students. So we get these funds, these FLAS Fellowship funds, and we're not allowed to use them except to give them to students. So these funds we get explicitly to give to you all. And so they're here to support you in pursuing advanced training in modern foreign languages and diverse fields of international and area studies. So what that means is spoken languages, and it's also less commonly taught spoken languages. So we'll talk about that later, but it essentially means there's not a focus on Spanish, French, or German. The goal of the fellowship is to foster foreign language acquisition and fluency, is to assist in the development of knowledge, resources, and trained personnel for the modern foreign languages and area studies, and also to develop a domestic pool of international experts to meet national needs. There we go. So there's 2 types of FLAS funding that our centers administer. There are summer FLAS grants, and there are academic year FLAS grants. These are the centers that my colleagues and I introduce ourselves right now. Oh, and also I forgot Luis Baez. I guess is he here? He didn't get to introduce himself. I'm so sorry.
I'm here, but I'm on the road, so that's why I'm calling in.
Understood. So Luis is from LILAS, and I'm so sorry I didn't give you the spotlight earlier, but he will answer, again, his contact information will be on here. He is representing LILAS, so the Latin American studies. So what are your languages, Luis?
Latin American languages and indigenous and Portuguese.
Awesome. Thank you. So these grants are that we administer are interdisciplinary, and they're open to students in all departments, colleges, and schools at UT. And just a small note about the summer FLAS this year is that we are all, like I said, at the end of our 4-year grant cycle. So we need to spend the federal funds that we've been allocated for these fellowships. And in order to do that, we need your help by applying for the summer FLAS fellowships. So if you are at all on the fence about this, please consider applying. You can make up your mind later if you get the grants and decide not to do it, that's okay. But we can't give you the money if you don't apply. So please consider applying for a summer FLAS because, again, like I said, we don't want to give back the money to the federal government. We'd much rather spend it on you all. As for academic year fellowships, these centers that you see here are applying. I'm missing oh, there it is. Okay, yes, I must have moved the slide up, sorry. Our centers are all applying for the next 22 to 23 academic year. That cycle falls in the next 4-year grant cycle. So we're in the process of applying for that funding. And so just as a side note, we're going to run the competitions as we usually would, but the 5 centers that you saw earlier are in the process of applying for these grants. And so you receiving the fellowships is contingent upon our receiving the grants. As a result, award notification might be delayed, or you might get language in your award notification saying this is contingent upon what we receive and how much, whether we receive the grant and how much we receive, right? But the same goes for academic year as for summer fellowships. They're interdisciplinary and open to all students in all departments and colleges at UT. So as I mentioned, we have funding for summer 2022, and we are applying for funding for the next academic year, but we're going to run those 2 fellowship application cycles concurrently. So the applications are currently happening for these 2 grants, for these 2 fellowship cycles. So if you are awarded, like I said, you'll get contingent wording. So for the academic year, we do encourage students to pursue additional funding opportunities or have some backup plans in mind for that. And as Matt wrote in the chat, we will be having an FAQ section at the end. And also if you have any questions, I'll stop periodically and you all, my colleagues will ask the questions that are in the chat if you have any. So let's talk about how the fellowships differ in terms of graduate students and undergraduate students receiving them. For graduate fellowships, you would receive institutional, there's 2 types of fellowships that you can apply to as a graduate student. One is a summer and one is academic year. For the summer, you receive institutional payments, which equals tuition or program fees, up to $5,000, which we pay directly to the program, the summer program that you do, which is a intensive language study. And there's a stipend of $2,500 that goes directly to the student to help offset the costs of participating in that program. The graduate academic year fellowships have changed a little bit for next year, so this is exciting. We still have up to $18,000 that we can pay in institutional payments, which just means direct tuition paid directly to the institution, usually UT if you are enrolled here, or potentially if you're doing a program abroad, which we'll talk about more later. And then a stipend for next year is going to go up to $20,000. So that will be paid in monthly installments to you as a FLAS fellow on top of this institutional payment. Another exciting thing about the graduate academic year fellowships is that we have received news from the college that liberal arts students will receive an insurance stipend to go with their graduate academic year fellowships. And we are hoping to also try to get funding for non-COLA students for that. You as graduate students you definitely can apply for both summer and academic year fellowships. That's highly encouraged. There's no reason not to. For undergraduate students, you are also able to apply for both summer and academic year fellowships. and we highly encourage you to apply for both, as mentioned, for the grad students. Your fee structure is a little bit different. For the summer, actually, it's the same. It's the same $5,000 for a program and $2,500 to offset those costs. And then for the academic year fellowship, you get $10,000 in tuition and a stipend of $5,000 that's paid directly to the student in monthly installments over the 9 months of the academic year fellowship. All right. Another thing to note about this fellowship, there are specific requirements set forth by the U.S. Department of Education that FLAS fellows must meet these stipulations. So they are only U.S. citizens, nationals, or permanent residents are eligible for FLAS fellowships. And you have to be accepted to or enrolled in full-time university level academic program for the next academic year and demonstrate a long-term interest in the particular language and area that you're studying. Applicants must also show a potential for high academic achievement, and we cannot give these awards to native speakers or those with a fluency that's equivalent to native speakers. More requirements to keep in mind for these fellowships are that undergraduate students must be at the intermediate or advanced level of whatever language they're applying for. That doesn't mean you have to be at the intermediate level right now while you're applying. It means that you are now or have before you start the award cycle. So if you're applying for a summer award, for example, you would now be in a beginner language coursework, so that when you get the award in the summer, you're at the intermediate level, if that makes sense. So we are not allowed to give awards to undergraduates who are starting a language from scratch. So you can't not have taken any Danish and apply for a FLAS fellowship to start learning Danish. Graduate students, on the other hand, can be awarded a FLAS for beginner level language study only if they can demonstrate advanced level proficiency in another foreign language that is relevant to the area of study or research that they're pursuing. So this means that, for example, if a student is already at advanced Russian, for example, they can pursue a beginner FLAS in, say, Bosnian, because they want to study Southeast Europe or something that has to do with, our region. However, no student can take Spanish, French, or German at the beginning level. As I mentioned earlier, these fellowships are for less commonly taught language proficiency is what they're trying to get among the population. So Spanish, French, or German cannot be taken at the beginner level. Only undergraduate students can't receive the FLAS for French, Spanish, or German at all, but graduate students can get a FLAS for Spanish, French, or German at the intermediate or advanced level to pursue their research interests. This is the list of approved languages at UT, and what I'll do now is pause for a minute and see if there are any questions that have come up in the chat so that you all can have a minute to kind of digest what we just talked about and see if there's anything you have to ask pertaining to that specific requirement criteria, to the award amounts, or to any confusion about what's allowable in terms of which languages can be funded. And I saw that Kelly put an example here of if you're taking Arabic 601C, that's the equivalent of first year, right? Even though it's just one semester, you would be at the intermediate level. Well, actually, yeah, that's true. She's saying, and if you take Arabic 611C in the spring, you'd be at the intermediate level by summer or fall. I know for Russian, we consider even just one semester of the 6 semester credit hour language courses to be beginner level. And after that, you're already considered an intermediate. All right.
Excuse me, Agnes, I'm sorry. There were just a few questions
Great.
Just wanted to add on here. I see one from Mauricio saying Mandarin isn't approved. And Mandarin is not on this list because the UT Austin we do not have an East Asia Studies Center that awards FLAS Fellowships. So we can't award those because, as I was saying, that there is no FLAS awarding East Asia, excuse me, East Asia Center at UT. Another question is, let me see here. How do they determine your fluency in a related language? Sorry, I forgot my camera was off. There's a few ways. One is when you apply, you're going to be self-attesting, basically saying that you are applying for a certain language based off of your coursework and whatnot, but you will have a UT language faculty assigned to you that will do a pre and post language evaluation, which will make sure that you do have that advanced level proficiency. Like if you're saying, hey, I have advanced level in Spanish, but my research requires me to learn Italian, so I'm going to start Italian at the beginner level. So then you would, excuse me, you would meet with the person, a Spanish language faculty, to make sure that you are at the minimum advanced level, and then we would go from there. So those are done through language evaluations.
Another way that your language can be determined, all of the FLAS applications require a language faculty member to speak to your language abilities. So a good thing would be to make sure that you are at the level that you think you would be in terms of what, level of language study. So you might want to meet with your language instructor or a language instructor to get that information from them so you know what level to apply at, and also to ensure that you have somebody who can vouch for your language learning abilities.
Another question that we had says, I know you said we could apply for summer and year-long FLAS. Can we be awarded both as graduate students, i.e. one summer and 1 year-long academic year applied and awarded separately? Yes, absolutely. Even though there's one name to FLAS, the summer fellowships and the academic year fellowships are technically considered two separate awards. So you can absolutely receive a summer fellowship for summer 22 and then a year-long for 22-23.
I see. Yeah.
Can I add something on that real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you absolutely can apply for both a summer award and an academic year award and be awarded both. But something that annoys our faculty committee when they're reviewing applications is please make sure that you submit a different statement of purpose for each application, because what you're doing with the summer award is different than what you're doing with the academic year award. So just be sure to have some clear goals and specificity in each of your statement of purpose.
That's a really good point. And also to piggyback off of that, as you can see on this list, there are some languages that pertain to multiple FLAS granting centers at UT. It's really important that you distinguish or delineate which center you're applying to in your application and why. Because we are required to only award FLAS fellowships within our area of study. So some of them do blur and intersect, like there are parts of Eastern Europe that are also in the EU, and therefore your reasoning, your statement of purpose might kind of hit both of those, if you apply to CREEES and CES for a language, but some of them you have to really make a case for why it makes sense for you to get a FLAS in Arabic from European studies. If you're not studying anything pertaining to Europe, then it actually doesn't make sense for you to apply. And so don't submit the same application you did to Middle East studies to Europe, if that makes sense, to European studies. I also saw in here, there was a question, if you are applying for FLAS and taking language classes at another university, would the award still apply? Did we answer that already? I don't remember. Okay. I'm not sure if that's relating to summer FLAS or academic year FLAS, but you are allowed, you have to be enrolled at a FLAS granting institution. So if you are enrolled as a student at UT, you're eligible for a FLAS. And yes, you can get funds to study the language at another institution. especially in the summer, we expect you to for the most part, unless there's a summer institute happening here, in which case you can get the FLAS for that. But if you, for the academic year, it depends on whether the language is offered here or not. So this list is not totally comprehensive in that if there is a language that falls into one of the centers that offer the FLAS, so for example, I'll use our center, Russian, East European, Eurasian Studies, you don't see Hungarian on here, but Hungarian is a language in our region, right? So you can apply for a summer FLAS to study Hungarian if you already are an undergrad and have intermediate proficiency, or if you're a grad and have advanced in something else and want to start Hungarian, for example. But you would not be able to study Hungarian here at UT because we don't offer it. And that's why it's not on this list. Does that make sense? So there are ways to study languages that are not on this list if they fall within the purview of one of our centers. And you would probably be expected to take that language at another institution. Is that all of it?
There was just one final question that came through. Excuse me. It says that as graduate students, are we restricted to strictly language study? I.e., could we visit archives and or do ethnographic study, furthering our research during the grant period, et cetera, et cetera. This is, we're going to get into this, I think, when we talk about the differences between the summer and academic year FLAS. But Drake, I will tell you that if you are awarded a summer FLAS, that is strictly for language study. So we would not support someone who was going to say, I'm speaking for my center, we would not support someone who say was going to Portugal to further their study of Portuguese and then say, oh, I'm doing archival research too. The FLAS in the summer is solely for language study. So we would not accept that. And that's let me rephrase that. The Department of Education does not accept that, I should say.
That's not to say you can't stay on after your FLAS and
Correct.
do archival research. You just can't get the FLAS to do archival research over
Correct.
the summer. And also I see a question here, when will the university know if we got the grant for academic year 22? I wish we knew. We can only say that the Department of Education is hoping to put the call out sometime early so that we would hopefully know before the end of the spring semester, but we have no way of controlling that. And it's all based on budget cycles and things that are totally out of our control. So hopefully we would know before the summer, but we have in the past not known until late into the summer and sometimes even the fall semester, which is pretty awful, but has happened. It also says if we get an academic year grant, do we need to study abroad the whole academic year or just one semester? You are not required to study abroad during the academic year on a FLAS fellowship. So I'm not sure if we, and we'll get into that a little bit more. You can study abroad and we'll talk about that more, but you actually can do your whole academic year at the University of Texas on a FLAS fellowship. So just to be clear on that. And then there's another question about if we are able to receive both, can it be for different languages? I'm assuming you mean summer academic year. Yes, you can apply for FLAS fellowships even during the same award period for different languages or to different centers. You can apply for advanced Hebrew for a summer FLAS and potentially a beginner Arabic for the following academic year. Is that right, Kelly? Great, so yes. Oh, she already said that, sorry. But that's for everyone else to know too. I think that's it, yeah? Or is,
Oh, I just answered a question in the chat asking if for summer scholarships or summer fellowships, is it okay to apply to institutions that are standalone and not necessarily US connected institutions? Absolutely. As you'll see in a minute, all summer programs require review and approval by the Department of Education. So yes, absolutely. Standalone or US or international institutions.
great. Also, just keep in mind that with spring course registration happening, if you're not at the right level, it's not too late to start taking a class. Some languages do start in spring. You can start their beginner level of the language in the spring. So just kind of do some research and see what opportunities are out there, and feel free to ask your FLAS coordinators for more information on that too, just to get you to that eligibility point. All right, so moving on, let's talk a little bit more specific about each type of FLAS. For summer FLAS, you are doing an intensive language study only, as Matt said before. The language courses can be taken either domestically or at some approved language program abroad, as long as that's at the intermediate or above level. So what that means is that if you are taking if you're a beginner of a language, you have to study the language domestically. If you're intermediate or above, you can choose whether you want to do it domestically or abroad. We'll talk about the requirements for going abroad, given the pandemic and Texas Global's requirements and all of that coming up. Language study during a summer FLAS has to be intensive, so it has to essentially cover one academic year of material. There are some timeframes to that. So down here, as you see, it has to be at least 6 weeks in length. And depending on what level you're at, it's at least 120 to 140 contact hours, which we'll go into again in a second. Overseas programs for a summer FLAS have to be approved by the FLAS Awarding Center, the FLAS Program Officer, who is in the U.S. Department of Education in DC, and a UT Global Risk and Safety team, depending on if they were, and they actually always do require travel authorization, and sometimes they require, and right now they do require restricted regions approval, and the entire world, I think, is a restricted region right now, including the US, according to the travel warnings. In some cases, applicants can get special approval for a language that is not on our center approved list. So this is what I talked about, like, for example, with Hungarian, but you need to check with the FLAS granting center before you apply to make sure that that's an appropriate language that can be covered by that center, and that your FLAS makes sense. Your FLAS application kind of makes sense for them. And then, as I mentioned, the FLAS have to be, the FLAS language programs have to be at least 6 weeks in length, and then there's also hourly requirements for that. For the academic year, students receiving an academic year FLAS are expected to be on fellowship both long semesters, so that's fall and spring. And during each of those long semesters, you are required to enroll in an area studies course that is appropriate to the center that you're receiving your FLAS grant from, as well as a foreign language course, which has to be, and I actually need to check on this. This says 3 contact hours, or we received guidance from the Department of Education saying 5, which is a little strange for how our courses are set up. So they're supposed to get back to us about that. But all of these courses, both the area studies and the foreign language course, have to be taken for a letter grade. We expect that any intermediate and advanced courses would probably be 3 hours a week, and I think we'll be approved for that, but stay tuned, I guess. Courses must also be approved by the center or the institute that you're getting your FLAS from to make sure that they're within our area of study. So, and we all have different criteria for that. So make sure you check with your FLAS coordinator of the center that you're applying to a FLAS through to make sure that your plan for studying, what courses you're going to take for your FLAS count. Also keep in mind that they don't have to count towards your degree. So you're getting paid by the government to learn about the language and cultures of a certain region. And the government is not just paying you to get your degree. So you might be taking classes that are extraneous to your degree program to meet these requirements. And that's okay by us. This is, again, like we said, academic year are both open to undergrad and graduate students, as are the summer awards. The only type of academic year awards that are open only to graduate students are the dissertation fellowships, which we'll talk about in a bit. For studying abroad, undergraduates, all of these require all of these different levels of approval, which we will guide you through once you're awarded a FLAS fellowship. But if you want to study abroad while on a FLAS, you'll be including that information ideally in your application. And If you apply for an academic year FLAS that's supposed to happen here at UT and decide you want to study abroad during it, you need to, as soon as possible, be running that by your FLAS coordinator and make sure that you can get all of the approvals through Texas Global and through the program officer and all the things that we need to do that during your FLAS period. Not all centers will allow undergraduate students to go abroad on a FLAS, so you need to check with the FLAS coordinator. For summer FLAS, you are allowed to study abroad once your program is approved by all of these different layers of approval. And again, like we said here, undergraduates for your academic year FLAS, it depends on the center, so you'll want to check with them. For graduate students, we require the same levels of approval, and the only stipulations are that you cannot study abroad if you're at the beginner level of a language, unless there's no domestic program available to study that language. So as you can imagine, those are in there's not a lot of circumstances that would meet that criteria, but some of the kind of more obscure languages of our region, or maybe more indigenous languages, that might be the case. Academic year FLASs are also available for either study, like study abroad where you enroll in an institution and are taking a full-time course load there, or dissertation research abroad. And that varies by center, so you'll want to check with your FLAS coordinator. You also cannot transfer in credit that you get abroad unless the credit that you're getting abroad is at the graduate level. And then whether or not you can get degree credit for that will vary by your department, that your home department of your graduate program. So that's something you'll want to work with your own graduate coordinator on. And all candidates who are planning to do dissertation research abroad have to be at the advanced level of the language. So because you're going to be, in the country doing pretty high level research in that language, they're requiring you to be at the advanced level. Let's see. Do we have any questions that have come up on this, or should I keep going? Looks like we're caught up, yeah?
Yeah, I don't see any questions here in the chat.
Great. So you're probably wondering what this means in terms of COVID and what the abroad restrictions are. So the US Department of Education, which is the granting agency for these funds and the final decision maker as a result, they will only give permission to travel abroad if the US Department of State and Center for Disease Control travel advisories are at a level 4, or at level 3 or below. You may not travel to a country if they're at level 4 or above in terms of risk level. What does that mean and what does that look like? You can look up the State Department travel warnings for a country, and then they'll kind of give you this drop down menu and you can type in the country that you're interested in. So for example, if you were wanting to go to North Macedonia, you would not be approved for doing that. But if you wanted to go to Liechtenstein, you would again have to submit your overseas program. It would have to meet all of the requirements of the FLAS, but based on the travel advisory, they would not necessarily deny it as a place that you are not allowed to go to because it's not safe. Does that make sense? Okay, the next layer of approval, what website was that from? Matt, did you just look up, was this the CDC or the State Department website?
That one right there is the State Department. I'll drop in the chat the links to both State Department and CDC. I will say, in my experience with trying to get some students abroad this semester, that the State Department, the CDC updates theirs, and then the State Department goes by the CDC. So I found that CDC tends to be a bit updated a bit more regularly, more timely, but they both, feed one into the other. But I'll drop those in the chat for y'all. And
yes, to answer the question, travel is typically approved for advisory levels 1, 2, and 3. However, the program has to be approved as well. So those are kind of separate processes, but travel is not approved for countries designated level 4 or which is do not travel. So as you can see here, that's a fair share of the world right now. Another layer of approval that you have to go through is Texas Global's Education Abroad Office. So they have their own international oversight committee that reviews restricted regions travel requests. And because of COVID, every single country in the world is a restricted region right now. So you will be required to go through this process. It can take some time because they only meet every 2 weeks or so. So if you're awarded a FLAS to go abroad, you'll be at least 30 days before your travel, you'll have to apply for approval from the State Department, or sorry, from the US Department of Education. And then as soon as possible, I would say around the same time frame, but preferably even more so, you'd want to apply for this restricted regions request, because I think the International Oversight Committee only meets every 2 weeks, to my understanding. So it would behoove you to also look up the requirements here. I will say that UT oversight committee has been granting travel to some regions that are level 4, but keep in mind the US Department of Education has the final say. So even if UT tells you you can, if you're planning on using FLAS funds, if the Department of Education says no, then we cannot give you those funds to go to that location. Are there any questions about traveling overseas on FLAS fellowships? It's not required. You can always do a domestic program, but you absolutely can, as long as your FLAS coordinator and all these people say, okay, go overseas. And we do encourage students going overseas. And I know everyone is itching to do that. And we're all crossing our fingers, hoping that by the summer, that will be a reality for as many of us as possible.
I have a question. So if it's only with the FLAS fellowship that we need to follow like the CDC guideline, like if we
All federal funding, like basically
Okay.
any federal agency that will follow the CDC and State Department guidelines on travel advisory. So if you're getting a Fulbright or a Boren or a FLAS fellowship, those are federally funded. And so they will only approve travel to areas that are level 3 or below.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
That's a good question though. And like I said, UT might grant you permission to go somewhere that's level 4, but you can't do it on federal funds. I have a question here about what is the rationale behind not allowing summer abroad travel for beginner language level learners? That is the US Department of Education wanting to not put people in a situation where they don't know the language and are abroad. It's not our stipulations. So they just want you to, I think what they're looking for is proving a commitment to this language and to this area of study before they give you funds to go abroad, if that makes sense. But I can't tell you because I didn't make up that rule. So that's just my interpretation. And then do the area studies send, however, again, if you can't find a program that's domestic that meets the FLAS criteria to do a beginner level study, you can go abroad. There are also sometimes programs that do like 6 weeks domestically, and then you can go for 4 weeks abroad. And we have had FLAS approved for that kind of a program. As long as you're doing those first 6 weeks domestic, you can continue studying that language abroad afterwards. Do the area studies centers have existent contacts with universities or programs abroad, or do we do the footwork independently? We expect you to decide where you all want to go and you apply to the programs. So it's on you to find a program that fits what you're trying to accomplish. However, there are definitely programs that we know that our students have gone on in the past on FLAS. Us as CREEES, we even have, I think, a link to FLAS eligible programs on our website that we have been compiling just kind of over the years. And because it's been years, some of them might be a little outdated. But ask your FLAS coordinator if you're confused on this. But yes, it is, you are totally able to just Google Polish language programs in Poland and find something that meets the FLAS criteria. Again, 120 contact hours is for, I think, advanced level, and then 140 for beginner and intermediate students for the summer class. And then as far as academic year study goes, you have to just be getting similar to what you would get at UT or better in terms of language instruction in country. So feel free to do as much, figure that out on your own and just come and check in with us about the programs that you find. Right, so we'll move on if we don't see any more questions. There are some competitive preference priorities that would be good for you to know about when applying for a FLAS. One of them is that we are required to consider financial need as a part of our ranking system. So that's not the number one priority. It's not strictly financial need driven. It's merit based first, and then financial need as a consideration. So what that means is that selection committees first rank FLAS applicants by your merit, and then as we consider financial need, it might move things around a little bit, right? So we do give competitive preference to students who have both the merit and the financial need component. And information so in order to meet this financial need requirement, what you would need to do is file a FAFSA for either this academic year or next academic year, but you would need to do it now. I think the FAFSA application's open as of October now, so you can start applying for a FAFSA now immediately if you know you're going to apply for a FLAS. If you don't file a FAFSA, it could potentially it definitely doesn't help you. So if you know you don't have financial need, we encourage you to still file a FAFSA just so that is included in your rank score. If you don't, it kind of gives you like 0 points in that regard, if that makes sense. We strongly recommend graduate and undergraduate students to file FAFSA for this reason, and also to ideally submit proof of submission during your FLAS application cycle, because that allows us to make sure that the financial need office gets us those rankings. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about FAFSA. Oh no, there's more. If you have any questions about this, you need to talk to the UT office for student financial services. They are the people who know and understand the FAFSA the best, and we don't get any information from them other than like a financial need rating. So we don't get to see anything that's in your FAFSA. That's federal records information. They just tell us on a scale of like 1 to 6, I think it is, where your financial need score is. If you want more information, you can go to this website. Like I said, they've already opened the applications, and it does take a long time to process. So please do apply as soon as possible for the FAFSA, or to the financial aid, the federal financial aid application. We prefer some centers require you to complete the FAFSA before the FLAS application deadline. If you don't, it's unlikely that we'll get your rating in time to consider it with the selection committee, if that makes sense. So apply as soon as possible, because it can take a really long time to get that rating back. It has to go through the federal agency, then through UT's financial aid office, and then we can get it from them. And we do offer a place for you to upload proof, or I don't know if everybody does. I know that several of us do offer a place for you to submit your proof of completion for the FAFSA in your FLAS application. And also give us permission to access that financial need rating. We are required to show that to the financial aid office. For the FLAS application deadlines, right now we have already opened, I think every center except mine has opened their applications online. Mine should be up by early next week, so by Monday, hopefully. But check each website. If you Google FLAS U Texas and then Middle East for Middle East Studies, or Europe or European Studies for their website, you can do Slavic for ours for CREEES. Or Latin American Studies, for example, or South Asia, you should be able to find their website pretty easily. Applications will be due in early February, but each center has their own application deadline, and you have to apply by that application deadline to each center. So also keep in mind that usually we give people we give your recommenders about a week after the application deadline to submit their recommendations. Please make sure to check with the center on that to make sure that that's the case for them. And also know that the notification of awards is going to vary by center. Each center website should kind of tell you more or less when to expect to hear from us. Again, keep in mind that this could change for the academic year because we're all going to be waiting on the feds to tell us whether we got the money. So yes, as far as I understand, and please speak up if you're a center FLAS coordinator and this is not true, we are having the same deadline for summer and academic year applications, which will be February.
Yes, I can confirm for European studies that both our academic year and 2022-23 and summer 22 applications will be due in February. Right now, the deadline is February 7th for those, but we may be extending that till February 14th. And that will be on our website, and you can check all of our websites in terms of deadlines, applications, as well as FLAS rules and regulations that we've been talking about here as well. So there will be also information on those websites too.
And you can use the same recommendations for your FLAS fellowships as whether it's summer or academic year. That's fine. It's more your statement of purpose. We want to see that you've thought through how those two awards are different and what you're planning on doing with them. So just to wrap up, a few frequently asked questions, and then after this, we'll open it up to questions from you all. How many FLAS fellowships are awarded per year? This will depend on how much funding we get and what levels we're funded at for each type of award. So we get funding for graduate academic year, for undergraduate academic year, and for summer awards. And each center has totally different numbers for that. So, and it also for summer, for example, this summer, we need to spend down our FLAS account. So we might be giving a lot more summer fellowships than we had originally been allocated funds to do. But for next academic year, we're totally uncertain because we won't know how much money we get until the federal government tells us that. Can I apply for both summer and academic year FLAS fellowships? You all probably know the answer to this because we went over it, but absolutely, please do. Can I receive the FLAS fellowship for consecutive summers and or academic years? Yes, it is not uncommon for fellows who continue to qualify for the fellowship to continually apply for it and to even be funded year after year or potentially summer, year after summer. Another FAQ that we get is, can I apply to multiple FLAS centers if they offer my language of interest? Again, yes, but please keep in mind the regional context in which your language and area studies are used. So as mentioned, in some languages, it makes sense. In some languages that it's just obvious, that language makes sense in that region. In some, you're gonna need to explain it in terms of your research interests. So for example, if you wish to use your FLAS to study Portuguese, the context in which you use your Portuguese language skills is, let's say it's in Portugal, because you're interested in studying things that happen in Europe, then European Studies would be the center to which you should apply, which is CES, the Center for European Studies. If you are more focused on Brazil or Latin American studies and Latin American culture with your study of Portuguese, then you need to apply to Latin American studies. If for some reason your research spans the two continents or regions, then at that point you might be able to apply to both, but you would need to make the case to the center for why you're applying there. Does that make sense?
If I may, Agnes, I just want to say with our review committee, this is something that very often pops up, and I do want to, let me just say, I do want to, point out, just explain, even if you're just applying to European studies and, you're applying for Italian, for example, why are you applying to European studies? Why are you applying to us? What is your, what is the rationale? A lot of times we just get, our reviewers, I should say, don't understand the rationale. So make the case for yourself and really, explain why for that. So just don't give anything as a given. A lot of these are faculty members who, while they know about the FLAS, they're not experts in the sense of all of the bureaucratic machinery behind all the FLAS. So just explain it out for them.
Yeah, it is a requirement of the FLAS that FLAS fellows show a commitment to the area that is funding them. So we as Eastern Europe are required to show, to have our FLAS fellows be committed to the study of our region. So you need to make that obvious in your application. Some other questions, can I be an AI or a TA as a FLAS fellow? Generally, yes, but this actually kind of varies from center to center, and it might also vary next academic year with the new TA AI stipends as well as FLAS fellowship stipends. So that's a little bit unclear. And also with the fact that we're trying to get insurance for all of our FLAS fellows, the College of Liberal Arts might not allow us to have students double dip, if you will. Some FLAS centers also have a strict no, like you can't AI well on a FLAS, because an AI is somebody who's actually teaching the class. The TA is, helping somebody else who's teaching the class. So it just depends, is what we should say here. Can I receive other fellowships with the FLAS? Also depends. It just depends. If the fellowship is federally funded and also in the same realm of what the FLAS is, funding you for. So for example, a FLAS fellowship, an academic year FLAS fellowship to go study, for example, in Russia, right? And you get a Fulbright to go to Russia. No, you cannot accept especially federal funding that is duplicative in nature. You can only accept usually one of these federally funded fellowships at a time. However, if the other fellowship is not federally funded, then there's a possibility that you can accept it, again, as long as it's not duplicative. So you're not getting a fellowship that's intended for you to get your tuition paid in order to study this language, for example, and the FLAS is also doing that, right? But if you're getting a fellowship from your department for like some other merit-based award or like a presidential endowed scholarship, things like that, that have nothing to do with the reasons of the FLAS and are not federally funded, then typically we will allow that to happen. The U.S. Department of Education just asks us to give the FLAS fellowships out to, consider a student's need when we do so. So if your other fellowship is awarded by the grad school, you need to check with both your FLAS coordinator, but also the graduate school, because the graduate school will not allow some terms, you to sometimes double dip on their funding either. All right, I will now scroll through the list of FLAS coordinators so that you can write down our contact information. You met some of us here today, and some of us you didn't, so their information is coming up here too. So please feel free to jot this down and we will take questions at this point. And once I kind of get through all these slides, I'll go to the, I'll go ahead and take this off so we can all have a conversation and ask questions as needed. But these are your FLAS coordinators. Again, for those of you who might be calling in or want to hear these names, for South Asia, it's Scott Webble, was not able to be here, but he's been administering the FLAS for a long time. So he's a great knowledgeable contact on this. Please reach out to him with your questions that are specific to South Asia, because we won't be able to answer those questions here. We do have both Sam and Kelly on the call from Middle East Studies, who are the FLAS coordinators. They split theirs up based on graduate. Kelly will handle those and Sam will handle undergraduate FLAS queries. Matt from European Studies is on the call, so if you have questions for that, feel free to ask them here. I am the Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies FLAS coordinator, and Louise, who had called in, is the Latin American Studies FLAS coordinator. So do we have any questions? And I'll go ahead, if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to stop share so that we can go to, there we go, see everybody and ask questions here.
I have a question. So for the I'm in the CREEES section. I'm doing Russian, and I checked the State Department the advisory level, and it says that, I mean, right now it's like, because of COVID, it's level 4, but it also says that it's level 4 because of Russia's lack of assistance to US citizens. So would it ever go down, or is that just like
Yes.
a political?
No,
like,
yeah, it has been level 3. So
Okay.
it's they have a travel warning because of that, but we have been able to send students there in the past. It just kind of
Okay.
depends on what's happening at the time. But if whatever reason brings it to level 4, it's at level 4 and you can't go. If that makes sense. And that's true for anywhere in the world. So that is a question that actually applies broadly as well. But, and also you can still apply for a summer class to go to like an area of the world like Russia, where there's currently a level 4 travel warning. If by summer, that's not an approved place for you to go, but you have received a FLAS for the summer, we'll ask you to find a program that's not in a level 4, travel advisory area. So don't not apply because you think, oh, it's at a level 4 right now. For one, that could change. And 2, we can just find a program somewhere else for you to go, whether domestically or they teach Russia and Latvia, which is in the European Union, or, you can get it in Ukraine, which I know is right now level 4, but, might not be by then. So don't let that totally deter you.
All right. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
I did see a question in the chat about does being interested in the literature of a country count as in this discourse of making a case for yourself, writing my dissertation on Hegel and need to learn German to read the original? Yes, absolutely. In that instance, I would also, if your dissertation is on Hegel, the figure of Hegel and something with Germany, just flesh it out a little bit. Because, for example, if you're talking about Hegelian philosophy, applied to what? If that's Hegelian philosophy applied to something in Southeast Asia, that's something that we could not fund. So just be specific about, pretty specific about the content, but also the context in which you'll be using the German language for that specific question.
And actually, we've even been able to give a FLAS to a student who was studying East Asian literature, but the effect of Russian writers and authors on specific East Asian authors. So there can be some crossover because the student needed to know and understand things about Russian or Soviet history that were influencing these people and learn Russian as a result of that. So there are ways that you can span different area studies as long as you're making a case for why it's relevant. And the student was very committed to studying our language. So it came across in the application and they were able to get funding on that note. So literature, definitely. And also it depends on how you make your case and, that it's something that each area study center feels like is actually a valid case for their region if you're spanning them. Is whether someone has received a FLAS award before be a factor of consideration? Would you be lower priority? In our center, I would say no. We have a different selection committee meet each time, so they just take each award is based on the merits of the people applying for that award. So they don't necessarily look at, oh, this person's already getting a summer FLAS. Oftentimes they don't even know that when they make their decisions.
And I can say for European studies, the same thing as well, that you are not prioritized, nor are you, excuse me, put on, lower priority because you've had a FLAS before. There was a question, are there ever exceptions to the related language rule for graduate students, e.g. if my advanced language is Spanish, but I have an interest in Arabic for your research? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's that is one of those situations where depending on what exactly your research is, you may be able to apply to both CES and CMES, depending on exactly the content, context, and overall the overall impact of your research.
Yeah. So to give an example, we have had, for example, a student who was advanced in Spanish and studying languages of former Yugoslavia because their thesis was on films in these two regions during a certain time period, if that makes sense, and how they might have influenced each other, right? Things like that. So do you happen to know of other funding opportunities or scholarships given to grad school applicants for Middle East studies? Can we contact? Oh, it sounds like.
Yeah, I replied in the
Okay,
chat.
Great.
Be happy to talk about
That's
that. But I did
very
see
specific.
Ian had another question.
Mhm.
Like, do you need to show that you've already been accepted to a program in your FLAS application? At least for us, no. Like in a summer FLAS application, for example, you would say, I'm hoping to go to, Qasid in Jordan, and I've sent in my application. And it's good to have backups just in case you don't get into your first choice program. And when you are accepted to FLAS, we say, hey, congratulations, we'd love to award you a summer FLAS for Arabic. Then you tell us, okay, great, I've been accepted to Qasid, or actually I decided to go to this other program in Lebanon instead. And we work it out that way.
And that's also true for incoming academic year students, like both undergrad and graduate students. You don't have to have already been accepted to apply for the FLAS. You do have to be accepted to the FLAS granting institution to get the FLAS. So by the time the FLAS committees are meeting, they would have to be waiting on confirmation of your acceptance to these programs to get those FLASs. So just keep that in mind. It's true for summer programs of going elsewhere, but also you can apply for a FLAS as an incoming student. Great. Does anyone else have a question or want to come off mic to ask anything of us?
I have one last question. Do you know what Russian level is considered intermediate? Like what Russian class, like from when on?
Yeah, that's a great question because it probably also varies from center to center, but for at least the Russian ones, we do consider, what we understand is that the 601 is a first year of language study condensed into one semester. So we consider 611C already intermediate.
Okay.
However, that doesn't mean you're necessarily advanced by the time you go to the next level. So our third year equivalents, the intermediate mid, are still considered intermediate. Advanced is fourth year and above for us. I know that varies.
Okay, because next semester I'm taking Russian 412K.
That's intermediate. Sorry.
Okay.
So the four-year cycle is beginner for the first semester or two, and then after that it's intermediate.
Okay, but that would be okay, right, for a FLAS?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Ian had just asked if they can contact any applicant can contact the center if for recommendations for summer programs, for backup or something. You can absolutely reach out to us. If we have some examples of past programs that were approved and and students had good experiences on and really learned from, absolutely we can share those program names with you. But I will also say that, especially for a summer program where it is intensive language learning, just kind of speaking as a former language teacher myself, you may find one program may, for example, they may have more options for you in terms of what your specific goals are for that specific language. You may find some are very just colloquial conversation. Some are really going to work with you on very grammar heavy topics that you might need for certain things. So while we can suggest, it really is up to you to find a program that fits your needs the best that it can.
And if you want to go to Middlebury, for example, but it's competitive, you can still apply for the FLAS saying that you intend to apply to Middlebury. If you don't get in, or if you decide later that's not quite the right program, you can use your FLAS to go on another FLAS approved language program. We're not going to hold you to the one on your application if you don't get into it, for example, if that makes sense. Kelly also had a really good point here. Do you want to say that one, Kelly?
Sure. Yeah, we at least for CMES, like we don't keep a running list of approved programs because it changes from time to time, and especially with the Middle East, like we have difficulty getting programs approved because things change. So we encourage students to ask their language instructors, hey, I'm thinking of studying abroad this summer. Do you have any recommendations as to where I should go? Do you know where other students have gone in the past? Because they're going to be the ones who have written letters of recommendation. So they'll know more off the top of their head, like, oh yeah, you know, Susie went to Qasid last summer and Jimmy went to Cairo to this other program. So that's what we recommend.
That's a really great point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's a great resource. Great. Any other questions? Well, we hope that all of you apply because we can't give you the money if you don't apply. And also keep in mind that even if you aren't necessarily awarded funds immediately, we have often moved down alternate lists for these fellowships. So apply so that we can give you the money. And don't get too disheartened, especially in summers like these, we do often end up going down alternate lists as well. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Great. All right.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Agnes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you,
guys.
Agnes.
Thanks
Bye,
for being
Kelly.
here.
Bye, Sam. Bye, Luis.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.